The autumn wind carried a promise as Nora Adams stepped off the train in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frightened bird. The year was 1878, and the frontier town sprawled before her, a collection of wooden buildings, hitching posts, and dreams as vast as the prairie itself. She clutched her letter of agreement in one gloved hand, the paper now worn at the creases from the countless times she had unfolded it during her journey from Boston. "You must be the mail-order bride," said the station master, his eyes widening as they traveled from her face down to her substantial frame, poorly disguised by her traveling clothes. "Yates Blackburn's waiting for you at the Cattleman's Hotel." Nora felt her cheeks flame. She had been honest in her correspondence, describing herself as a woman of generous proportions. But the look on the station master's face told her that her future husband might be expecting something else entirely. She smoothed down her dress, a practical navy blue that had seen better days, and nodded. "Thank you, sir," she said, voice steady despite the anxiety coiling inside her. "Could you direct me to the Cattleman's Hotel?" The station master pointed down the main street. "3 blocks down on the right, can't miss it. It's the tallest building in town." His gaze lingered on her waistline. "Though I reckon Blackburn might be surprised when he sees what's arrived for him." The sting of his words followed Nora as she gathered her 2 modest bags and made her way down the dusty street. Scottsbluff was nothing like Boston, with its cobbled streets and brick buildings. Here, the earth itself seemed to breathe beneath her feet, and the vast blue sky pressed down with an unfamiliar weight. As she walked, she noticed the stares from the townspeople, some curious, others openly judgmental. A pair of young women in front of the general store whispered behind their hands, their eyes fixed on Nora's figure. She held her head high, though her confidence wavered with each step. The Cattleman's Hotel rose before her, a 3-story wooden structure with a wide porch and swinging doors. As she climbed the steps, her luggage growing heavier by the moment, Nora caught sight of her reflection in the window. Her auburn hair was coming loose from its pins, her round face flushed from both exertion and embarrassment. Inside, the hotel lobby was mercifully cool after the midday heat. A man stood with his back to her, talking to the clerk. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore dusty riding clothes and a Stetson hat. When he turned at the sound of the door, Nora's breath caught in her throat. Yates Blackburn was handsome in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of hard work and harder living. His eyes were the clear blue of a mountain lake, his face tanned and lined from the sun. A scar traced a path from his left temple to his jaw, adding character rather than detracting from his good looks. Those blue eyes widened slightly as they took in Nora, and she braced herself for the disappointment she was certain would follow. "Miss Adams?" he asked, his voice deep and graveled. "Mr. Blackburn," she confirmed, straightening her spine. "I've come as we arranged." A group of men seated at a nearby table snickered. One of them, a heavy-set fellow with a drooping mustache, called out, "Yates, you said you ordered a bride, not the whole darn church social." Laughter erupted, and Nora felt the blood drain from her face. This was exactly what she had feared: the mockery, the cruel jests at her expense. In Boston, she had been passed over by every eligible bachelor, her size deemed unsuitable for marriage despite her intelligence and gentle nature. The advertisement for a frontier husband had seemed like her last chance at the family she yearned for. She waited for Yates to join in the laughter, to reject her on the spot. Instead, he turned slowly toward the table of men, his expression dangerously calm. "I suggest you apologize to the lady," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Aw, come on, Yates," the mustached man protested. "It was just a jest." "I'm not laughing," Yates replied, "and neither is Miss Adams." The room grew silent, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Finally, the man stood, doffing his hat with an exaggerated bow. "My apologies, miss, no offense meant." Yates turned back to Nora, his expression softening. He stepped closer, taking one of her bags. "Don't mind them," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Most of them haven't seen a woman with real refinement in their lives. Before Nora could respond, the hotel clerk cleared his throat. Will the lady be needing a room, Mr. Blackburn? No, Yates said firmly. We'll be married this afternoon by Pastor Wilkins, as arranged. Then I'll be taking my wife home. He looked at Nora again, his gaze steady. Unless you've changed your mind after meeting me, Nora shook her head, unable to find her voice for a moment. This wasn't at all what she had expected. Where was the disgust, the rejection? No, she managed at last. I haven't changed my mind. Yates nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Good, I've got the wagon outside. We can stop by the pastor's house on our way to the ranch. As they stepped back onto the porch, the heat of the day enveloping them once more, Nora found her courage. Mr. Blackburn, Yates, he corrected. Yates, she said, testing the name on her tongue. I feel I should address something. I was honest in my letters about my appearance, but sometimes words on paper don't prepare one for reality. If you find me unsuitable, I would understand if you wish to nullify our arrangement. His eyes met hers, searching her face. Why would I find you unsuitable? Nora gestured helplessly at herself. I'm not. I'm larger than most women. I know that's not what men typically desire in a wife. Yates was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set down her bags and took her gloved hand in his much larger one. Miss Adams, Nora. I didn't write for a wife because I wanted a specific shape. I wrote because I need a partner. Someone smart enough to help run the books for my ranch, kind enough to make a home out of a house that's seen too much loneliness, and brave enough to leave everything behind for an uncertain future with a stranger. He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. Your letters showed me all of that. And now that I see you standing here, his voice softened, almost to a whisper. I see nothing but beauty here. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Nora felt something unwind within her chest, a knot of tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Now, Yates continued, picking up her bags again, shall we go see Pastor Wilkins and make this official? Nora nodded, unable to trust her voice. As they walked to the wagon parked at the hitching post, she noticed more stares, more whispers. But with Yates walking tall beside her, they somehow mattered less. The pastor's house was a modest white clapboard structure with a small garden out front. Pastor Wilkins was a thin man with kind eyes and a receding hairline. He welcomed them warmly, though Nora caught the slight widening of his eyes when he saw her, the brief flicker of surprise that she had grown accustomed to. Mr. Blackburn and his bride-to-be, he said, ushering them into a small sitting room. I've prepared the necessary papers. The ceremony was brief and simple, nothing like the elaborate church weddings Nora had once dreamed of. Pastor Wilkins read from his Bible and they exchanged simple vows. Yates had purchased a plain gold band that he slipped onto her finger, his hands steady and warm. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Pastor Wilkins declared. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Blackburn. Nora held her breath as Yates leaned down. His kiss was gentle, almost hesitant a promise rather than a passion. When he pulled away, his eyes held a question she couldn't quite decipher. They thanked the pastor, signed the marriage certificate, and soon were back in the wagon, heading out of town. Nora sat stiffly beside her new husband, overwhelmed by the swift change in her circumstances. Just that morning, she had been Miss Nora Adams of Boston, spinster and object of pity. Now she was Mrs. Yates Blackburn, ranch wife of Scottsbluff, Nebraska. As the wagon rumbled along, leaving the town behind, Nora gazed out at the endless expanse of prairie. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, this new world stretching before her. It's about an hour to the ranch, Yates said, breaking the silence. Not much to look at compared to what you're used to in Boston, I expect. I think it's beautiful, Nora replied honestly. There's so much space in Boston, buildings press in on you from all sides. Here you can breathe. Yates glanced at her, a smile lifting one corner of his mouth. That's what I thought when I first came out here 10 years ago. I was just a boy then, looking for something I couldn't name. Did you find it? She asked. He considered the question. Parts of it. The land, the cattle, the business that came together better than I'd hoped. But a man needs more than just work to feel whole. The implication hung between them, neither uncomfortable nor presumptuous. Nora found herself studying his profile as he guided the horses, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hat shaded his eyes from the afternoon sun. "What made you answer my advertisement?" Yates asked after a while, Nora's fingers twisted in her lap. "I wanted a chance," she said simply. "In Boston, I was overlooked. My father died last year and my mother passed when I was young. I was facing a future as a burden to distant relatives or a life of meager employment as a companion or governess." She paused. "Your letter spoke of partnership, not ownership." "Of building something together, it appealed to me." Yates nodded slowly. "My father taught me that a marriage should be a team pulling in the same direction. He and my mother had that before the fever took them both." His hands tightened on the reins. "I've built the ranch up from nearly nothing, but it needs a woman's touch, and He cleared his throat. "I've been alone too long." The vulnerability in his admission touched Nora deeply. Here was a man who had achieved material success, yet recognized the emptiness of success without someone to share it. "There's the house," Yates said, pointing ahead. Nora gasped. She had expected a crude cabin or a simple farmhouse. Instead, a substantial two-story home rose from the prairie, painted white with green shutters. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and a barn and several outbuildings stood nearby. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but it spoke of prosperity and care. "You built this?" she asked. "Most of it with help from my ranch hands for the raising. Added the second story last year." There was a touch of pride in his voice. "There's 4 bedrooms upstairs. Thought it might be nice to fill them someday." The implication of their children brought heat to Nora's cheeks. It was a natural expectation of marriage, of course, but the reality of it suddenly struck her. This man beside her, this virtual stranger, would be her husband in every sense of the word. As if reading her thoughts, Yates added quietly, "No rush on anything, Nora. We've got time to get to know each other proper." Relief and gratitude washed over her. "Thank you," she whispered. They pulled up to the house, and Yates hopped down from the wagon, coming around to help her down. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her, strong and sure, setting her gently on the ground. For a moment they stood close, his hands lingering at her sides, her face tilted up to his. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackburn," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Nora felt a tremor run through her at the sound of her new name. "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn Yates." He smiled then, a full smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and lighter. "Let me show you around." Inside, the house was simply but comfortably furnished. The main floor consisted of a spacious kitchen with a large cast iron stove, a dining room with a table that could seat 8, a comfortable parlor with a stone fireplace, and a small study lined with bookshelves. "You have books," Nora said, unable to hide her delight as she ran her fingers along the spines. "Not many who'd notice that first thing," Yates observed, watching her with interest. "You like to read? I love it. My father was a professor of literature. Our house was full of books." Her voice caught on the memory. "I brought a few with me, but I had to leave most behind." "Well, what's mine is yours now," Yates said. "Not that I've read half of them. Some came with the house, others I picked up thinking I might get to them someday." Upstairs, he showed her the 4 bedrooms, the master bedroom at the front of the house, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, and 3 smaller rooms, currently empty save for basic furnishings. "This one could be your private sitting room if you like," Yates said, indicating the room adjacent to the master bedroom. "For your sewing or reading or whatever you enjoy." The consideration touched Nora deeply. In a world where women were often expected to subsume their identities within their husbands, this offer of personal space felt like a precious gift. "That's very thoughtful," she said. "Though I should warn you, my sewing skills are rudimentary at best." Yates shrugged. "No matter. We can trade for such things in town. I'm more interested in your bookkeeping abilities if you're still willing." "Of course. I managed my father's household accounts for years." He nodded, looking pleased. "The ranch is doing well, but I've never had a head for numbers. Been muddling through, but I suspect I'm missing opportunities." They returned downstairs, and Yates showed her the back of the house where a covered porch looked out over a kitchen garden, currently fallow in the autumn weather. Mrs. Jenkins from town comes out twice a week to help with cleaning and laundry, Yates explained, and to tend the garden in season, but the cooking. He looked slightly embarrassed. I've been managing on my own, badly, Nora laughed, the sound startling them both. Well, that's one area where I can definitely help. I'm an excellent cook. Are you now? His eyes lit up. That's the best news I've heard all day. The ease between them was unexpected and welcome. Nora had prepared herself for awkwardness, for disappointment, for a cold business arrangement at best. This warmth, this genuine interest was more than she had dared to hope for. I should tend to the horses, Yates said. Make yourself at home, explore wherever you like. This is your house now, too. After he left, Nora stood in the kitchen, running her hand along the smooth countertop. Your house now, too. The words echoed in her mind, filling her with a tentative joy. Perhaps here, in this vast landscape so far from the rigid society she had known, she might find acceptance. Perhaps with this man, who looked at her with respect rather than ridicule, she might find happiness. She opened cupboards, familiarizing herself with the kitchen's contents, mentally planning what she might prepare for their first dinner as husband and wife. The pantry was well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, coffee, preserved fruits, and vegetables. A cold box held butter, eggs, and a cut of beef. By the time Yates returned from the barn, Nora had a pot of stew simmering on the stove and biscuits browning in the oven. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of cooking. He paused in the doorway, his expression one of amazement. That smells incredible. Nora turned from the stove, a flush of pleasure warming her cheeks. I hope you'll enjoy it. I found everything I needed. I haven't had a home-cooked meal since. He trailed off, shaking his head. It's been a while. As they sat down to dinner, Nora noticed that Yates had washed up, his hair still damp at the temples, his shirt clean. The consideration made her heart flutter. This is delicious, he said after his first bite, the genuine appreciation in his voice making Nora smile. Thank you. I should warn you that I'll need to learn how to cook for the prairie. Boston cooking and Nebraska cooking might be different beasts entirely. I'm no expert, but I'd say you're off to a fine start. He reached for another biscuit. Tell me more about your life in Boston. Your letters mentioned your father was a professor? And so they talked, the conversation flowing more easily than either might have expected. Nora told him about her childhood, her education, her love of literature and history. Yates spoke of his journey west as a young man, the early struggles to establish the ranch, his dreams for expanding the herd and improving the bloodlines of his cattle. I've got 20 hands working for me now, he explained. Most live in the bunkhouse near the main corral, but a few of the married men have small cabins on the property. Good men, hardworking, they'll be curious about you, but they know to be respectful. Will they? Nora hesitated. Will they think it's strange that you've married someone like me? Yates set down his fork, his expression serious. Nora, I need to say something, and I want you to really hear me. There is nothing strange about me marrying you, nothing at all. He took a breath. I know what those fools in town were laughing about. I've seen how people can be cruel about such things. But out here, what matters is character, strength, and heart. You've got all three in spades. His words washed over her like a healing balm. How long had she yearned to hear such acceptance? How many tears had she shed over the casual cruelty of society's narrow standards of beauty? Thank you, she whispered, blinking back sudden tears. They finished dinner in a comfortable silence, and Nora insisted on cleaning up despite Yates's protests. You cooked. Least I can do is help with the dishes, he said, rolling up his sleeves. They worked side by side, Nora washing and Yates drying, their movements falling into an easy rhythm that belied their short acquaintance. As night fell, however, the easy camaraderie gave way to nervous tension. The reality of their situation, two strangers now married, expected to share a bed and a life pressed in on them both. I'll sleep in the study tonight, Yates said abruptly as they finished the dishes. Give you time to settle in. Relief and disappointment warred within Nora. That's very considerate, but you needn't sacrifice your comfort. The bed is large enough that we could share without imposing on each other. Yates studied her face. Are you sure? I meant what I said earlier about taking time. Nora nodded, though her heart was racing. We are married, after all. A small smile curved Yates's mouth. That we are, Mrs. Blackburn. The simple domesticity of preparing for bed together was both strange and comforting. They took turns using the washroom off the kitchen, and Nora changed into her nightgown behind a screen in the bedroom, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons at her throat. When she emerged, Yates was already in bed, the covers pulled to his waist, his chest bare. Nora averted her eyes, her cheeks burning as she hurried to her side of the bed and slipped between the sheets, keeping a careful distance between them. "Good night, Nora," Yates said softly, blowing out the lamp on his bedside table. "Good night, Yates," she replied, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. In the darkness, she lay rigid, acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the steady rhythm of his breathing. She had never shared a bed with anyone, let alone a man, a husband. The strangeness of it kept sleep at bay, even as exhaustion from her long journey and the emotional tumult of the day weighed on her. Beside her, Yates seemed equally awake. After what felt like hours, he spoke into the darkness. "I know this is all very sudden. Marriage to a stranger, a new place, new expectations. If you ever feel overwhelmed or unhappy, I hope you'll tell me." The vulnerability in his voice touched Nora deeply. "I will," she promised, "and the same goes for you." "If you find that I'm not what you hoped for, Nora," he interrupted gently, "you're exactly what I hoped for. I just want to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me by coming here." Something warm bloomed in her chest at his words. "I think," she said carefully, "that we may both have been fortunate in our arrangement." She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. "I believe you're right." With that understanding between them, sleep finally claimed them both, the first night of their marriage passing in peaceful slumber. The morning brought a new set of discoveries as Nora began to settle into life as a rancher's wife. Yates rose before dawn, moving quietly so as not to wake her, but Nora was already alert, unused to the profound silence of the prairie night. "You don't need to get up yet," Yates said when he saw her sitting up in bed. "It's early still." "I want to," she replied. "I should start as I mean to go on." He smiled at that, appreciation warming his eyes. "I'll get the stove going for you." By the time Nora had dressed and made her way downstairs, the kitchen was warm and coffee was brewing on the stove. Yates was nowhere to be seen, presumably out in the barn or with his men. Nora set about making breakfast, finding satisfaction in the simple task of mixing batter for pancakes, slicing bacon, setting the table. When Yates returned, stamping his boots at the door and hanging his hat on a peg, the look of pleased surprise on his face was worth every effort. "You're spoiling me already," he said, washing his hands at the basin by the door. "Hardly. This is just breakfast." They ate together, discussing the day ahead. Yates explained that he would be out with the herd most of the day, checking on new calves and moving them to fresh grazing land. "I usually take lunch with me," he said, "but I could come back to the house if you'd prefer." "No need to disrupt your routine," Nora said. "I'll pack something for you to take." She hesitated. "I thought I might inventory the pantry and make a list of anything we need from town, and perhaps you could show me the account books when you have time." Yates nodded, looking pleased. "They're in the study, top drawer of the desk. A proper mess, I'm afraid. I'd be grateful for any sense you can make of them." After Yates left with a packed lunch and a shy, brief kiss to her cheek that left Nora blushing, she set about exploring her new domain more thoroughly. The house was well built, but in need of a woman's touch. Dust had settled in corners, and the curtains hanging at the windows were faded from the sun. In the study, Nora found the account books as Yates had described, a jumble of figures and notations that would take time to decipher. But there was a logic to the chaos, and Nora felt a surge of purpose. This was something tangible she could contribute, a way to be useful beyond keeping house. She spent the morning organizing the ledgers, making neat columns of income and expenditures, noting patterns in the ranch's finances. By midday, she had a clearer picture of the operation. Yates hadn't been exaggerating when he said the ranch was doing well. Despite his self-professed lack of skill with numbers, he had built a profitable enterprise. With proper bookkeeping, they might expand further, as he had mentioned hoping to do. A knock at the door startled Nora from her work. Opening it cautiously, she found a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun. "Mrs. Blackburn, I presume." The woman said, her keen eyes taking in Nora's appearance with undisguised curiosity. "I'm Mrs. Jenkins. I come Tuesdays and Fridays to help with the house." "Oh yes, Yates mentioned you." Nora stepped back to allow the woman entry. "Please come in, it's lovely to meet you, Mrs." Jenkins bustled in, already removing her shawl. "Well, this is a surprise, I must say. Mr. Blackburn never mentioned he was bringing home a bride. The whole town's talking about it." Nora's stomach tightened. "Are they indeed?" "Oh, don't you worry about town gossip, Mrs." Jenkins said, waving a dismissive hand. "Half of them are jealous he's off the market, and the other half are just shocked he finally took the plunge. Man like that could have his pick, you know." The implication was clear. Why had he chosen Nora? But Mrs. Jenkins didn't seem malicious, merely curious. "It was a correspondence arrangement," Nora explained, deciding that honesty was the best approach. "We wrote to each other for several months before I traveled here." Mrs. Jenkins nodded sagely. "Sensible way to go about it. Get to know the mind before the face. My sister did the same, went out to Oregon to marry a shopkeeper she'd never laid eyes on. 20 years and 6 children later, they're happy as can be." She hung her shawl on a peg and rolled up her sleeves. "Now, what needs doing today?" "Laundry, I expect, and those floors could use a good scrubbing." Nora found herself warming to the older woman's practical, no-nonsense manner. Together they tackled the house, with Mrs. Jenkins showing Nora where supplies were kept and explaining the quirks of the stove and pump. "Mr. Blackburn's a good man," Mrs. Jenkins said as they hung laundry on the line behind the house. "Works hard, treats his hands fair, pays on time, never raises his voice even when he's got cause to." She gave Nora a sidelong glance. "Not like some men out here." "I believe you're right," Nora agreed. "He's been very kind." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Man needs a wife, and this house needs a woman's touch. Been saying so for years." By the time Mrs. Jenkins left in the mid-afternoon, Nora felt she had made an ally. The older woman had shared useful information about the town, the neighbors, and which traders offered the best prices on various goods. "I'll be back Friday," Mrs. Jenkins said as she departed. "You make a list of anything you need from town, and I'll bring it out with me." Alone again, Nora returned to the account books, working until her eyes grew tired. Then she turned her attention to dinner, determined to have a hot meal waiting when Yates returned. The sun was setting when she heard the sound of horses and men's voices outside. Peering through the window, she saw Yates dismounting, speaking with a group of ranch hands before sending them off toward the bunkhouse. His shoulders were slumped with fatigue, but there was an easy confidence in the way he moved, in how the men listened when he spoke. When he entered the house, the scent of roasting chicken and fresh bread greeted him. His eyes found Nora in the kitchen, and the smile that spread across his face was like the sunrise. "You're a miracle," he said, hanging his hat and removing his boots. "I was half convinced yesterday was a dream, that I'd come home to cold beans and silence." Nora laughed, the sound coming easier now. "No cold beans today, I'm afraid, but I can arrange it tomorrow if you prefer." Yates crossed to her, hesitating only briefly before placing his hands on her shoulders. "Don't you dare," he said, and then, surprising them both, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, but unlike the chaste peck at their wedding, this one lingered, warm and sweet. When he pulled back, Yates looked as startled as Nora felt. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I shouldn't have presumed." "No," Nora interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't apologize. We are married, after all." Something shifted in Yates's expression, relief, perhaps, or hope. "That we are," he agreed, echoing his words from the night before. They ate dinner together, the conversation flowing more easily than the previous evening. Yates told her about his day, the challenges with a particularly stubborn bull, his plans for breeding a stronger, more drought-resistant herd. "I met Mrs. Jenkins today," Nora said when he asked about her day. "She was surprised to find you'd brought home a wife." Yates chuckled. "I bet she was. Mrs. Jenkins has been trying to marry me off to her niece for 2 years now." She seemed to approve despite her surprise. "Good." Yates's expression grew serious. "And you, how are you finding everything?" Truth now, Nora considered the question. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "Everything is so different from what I'm accustomed to, but it's also freeing in a way. In Boston, I felt constantly judged, constantly found wanting. Here, there's so much space to breathe, to be." "And us?" Yates asked, his voice dropping lower. "How are you finding this?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Nora met his gaze steadily. "Easier than I expected," she said honestly. "You're not what I prepared myself for." "What did you prepare yourself for?" "Someone impatient, perhaps unkind, someone who would see me as a convenience rather than a person." She looked down at her plate. "Someone who would be disappointed by my appearance." Yates reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Nora, look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "I want to be clear about something. When I saw you step off that train, I wasn't disappointed, not for a single moment. You're a beautiful woman, and any man with eyes in his head can see that." The conviction in his voice made Nora's throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need for thanks, it's just the truth." He squeezed her hand before releasing it. "Now, tell me about these account books." "Make any sense of my scribbling?" The evening passed comfortably as Nora explained her findings, suggesting improvements to the bookkeeping system. Yates listened attentively, asking intelligent questions and seeming genuinely impressed with her insights. "You've got a better head for this than I ever will," he said when she finished. "I'd be grateful if you'd take over the books entirely." "I'd be happy to," Nora said, pleased by his trust in her abilities. That night when they retired to bed, the awkwardness of the previous evening had diminished. They lay side by side, close enough to feel the warmth of each other without touching. "Good night, Nora," Yates said, his voice soft in the darkness. "Good night, Yates," she replied. This time, sleep came more easily. The days fell into a rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. Nora settled into her role as the ranch's mistress, managing the household, keeping the books meticulously, and learning the ways of frontier life. Yates taught her to ride, patiently helping her overcome her initial fear of the large animals. Mrs. Jenkins became a friend as well as a helper, bringing news from town and offering practical advice on everything from preserving food to predicting weather from the behavior of local wildlife. The ranch hands, initially wary of their boss's new wife, warmed to Nora after she began sending extra pies and cakes to the bunkhouse. On Sundays, when work was lighter, she and Yates would often invite the married hands and their families for dinner, filling the house with conversation and laughter. Through it all, Nora and Yates grew closer, their marriage evolving from an arrangement of convenience into something deeper. They discovered shared interests, a love of reading, a dry sense of humor, a preference for quiet evenings by the fire over the raucous entertainments offered in town. Physical affection between them increased gradually. A hand at the small of her back as they walked. His arm around her shoulders as they sat together in the evenings. Her fingers straightening his collar before he left for the day. Small gestures that built a foundation of trust and comfort, yet they had not consummated their marriage. Yates had been true to his word about giving Nora time, never pressing for more intimacy than she seemed ready for. Their kisses had grown deeper, more passionate, but he always pulled back before things progressed too far, leaving Nora with a mixture of relief and frustration. One evening in late November, as they sat reading by the fire, Nora found herself watching Yates over the top of her book. The firelight played across his features, casting shadows that emphasized the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. He was handsome, yes, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a fundamental decency that Nora had come to treasure. As if feeling her gaze, Yates looked up from his own book. "What is it?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "I was just thinking," Nora said, setting her book aside. "You've been very patient with me." Yates marked his place and closed his book. Have I? You know you have. Most men wouldn't have waited so long to claim their marital rights. A shadow crossed his face. I don't think of it that way. Marriage isn't about rights, it's about trust, he paused, and love ideally. The word hung between them, neither having used it before. Do you think it's possible, Nora asked carefully, to grow to love someone, even if it wasn't there at the beginning? Yates's eyes never left hers. I think it's not only possible but likely when the person is as remarkable as you. Nora's heart quickened. Yates, a sudden commotion outside interrupted her. Shouts and the sound of running footsteps had them both rising, Yates moving quickly to the door. Stay here, he said, grabbing his coat and hat. But Nora followed him onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold night air. One of the ranch hands, young Noah, barely 18, was running toward the house, his face pale in the moonlight. Mr. Blackburn, he called. Fire at the south pasture fence line. Looks deliberate, Yates's expression hardened. Get the men, bring buckets, blankets, anything to beat it back. He turned to Nora. This could be bad. The grass is dry, and if the wind picks up, what do you need me to do? Nora asked, already mentally cataloging supplies they might need. Fill every container you can with water. Some of the men will come for them, and keep a watch on the house and barn. If the fire changes direction, I understand, Nora said. Be careful. Yates nodded grimly before striding off with Noah, calling instructions to the men who were already gathering. For the next several hours, Nora worked tirelessly, filling buckets, pots, even the washing tub with water. She could see the glow of the fire in the distance, orange against the night sky. Ranch hands came and went, their faces streaked with soot, taking water and returning with empty containers. How bad is it? She asked one of the older hands, a man called Cooper. Bad enough, he replied grimly. Boss thinks it was set by the Harmon gang. They've been causing trouble since he refused to sell them that parcel of land by the creek. Nora had heard of the Harmons, a family of rough men who owned a neighboring ranch and had a reputation for intimidation and underhanded dealings. Will they contain it? Cooper nodded. Fire breaks holding on the east side. They're working on the west now, but it's going to be a long night. It was nearly dawn when Yates finally returned, exhausted and filthy, his clothes reeking of smoke. Nora met him at the door with hot coffee and clean water for washing. It's out, he said, his voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. Lost about a quarter-mile of fence line and some grazing land, but no cattle and none of the men were hurt. Thank God for that, Nora said, helping him remove his ruined coat. Sit down before you fall down. I've got breakfast nearly ready. Yates sank into a chair at the kitchen table, accepting the coffee gratefully. You're a godsend, Nora. I don't know what I'd have done without you tonight. She smiled tiredly. What any rancher's wife would do, I expect. He caught her hand as she moved past him. No, not just any wife, you. The warmth in his eyes made her heart flutter despite her exhaustion. She squeezed his hand. Drink your coffee. You need to eat and then rest. After a hasty breakfast, Yates finally agreed to lie down for a few hours. Nora urged him to take the bed while she continued to help coordinate care for the men who had fought the fire all night. By midday, with the immediate crisis past, Nora finally sought her own rest. She entered the bedroom quietly, not wanting to wake Yates, but found him sitting up in bed watching the door. I thought you'd be asleep, she said. Couldn't settle, he replied. Too much on my mind. Nora sat on the edge of the bed. The Harmons, Yates nodded. If it was them, and I'm almost certain it was, they won't stop here. They want that land, and they're not above using any means to get it. Why is it so important to them? Water rights. The creek that runs through that parcel is the only reliable water source for miles during the dry season. My father secured the rights legally, fair and square. Old man Harmon's been disputing it ever since, and now his sons are carrying on the grudge. Nora frowned. Can't the law help? Sheriff Burke is a good man, but he's outnumbered and outgunned when it comes to the Harmons. And they're careful never leave enough evidence to make charges stick. Yates ran a hand through his hair, still dirty from the night's work. I'm sorry to bring you into this, Nora. It's not what you signed up for. I signed up for everything that comes with being your wife, Nora said firmly. The good and the difficult. Yates studied her face, his expression softening. "Have I told you how remarkable you are, once or twice?" she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "Now you should sleep. The problems will still be there in a few hours, and you'll think more clearly after rest." He caught her hand as she started to rise. "Stay with me," the simple request held layers of meaning. Nora nodded, removing only her shoes before lying down beside him on the bed. Yates pulled her close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. It was the closest they had been, and Nora found herself relaxing into his embrace, the solid warmth of him comforting in the aftermath of the night's fear. "Nora," Yates murmured against her hair, his voice thick with exhaustion, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words, so unexpected yet so hoped for, brought tears to Nora's eyes. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. She felt his arm tighten around her, felt the press of his lips against her hair, and then his breathing deepened as sleep finally claimed him. Nora remained awake a while longer, marveling at how her life had changed in just a few short months. From lonely spinster to beloved wife, from crowded Boston to the vast Nebraska prairie. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was, she realized, exactly the life she wanted. When she finally slept, it was with a sense of peace that not even the threat of the Harmons could disturb. The aftermath of the fire brought new challenges. While the immediate damage was not catastrophic, the loss of grazing land meant rethinking their winter strategy for feeding the herd. Yates spent long days working with the men to repair the fence line and assess the burned pasture. Nora, meanwhile, took on more responsibility for the day-to-day running of the ranch. She coordinated with Mrs. Jenkins to ensure the men had hot meals, organized supplies, and kept careful track of expenditures related to the fire damage. One afternoon, about a week after the fire, Yates returned to the house earlier than usual, his expression grim. "What is it?" Nora asked, setting aside the mending she had been working on. Sheriff Burke wrote out this morning. They found empty kerosene cans and boot prints that matched the youngest Harmon boy near where the fire started. Yates removed his hat, turning it in his hands, but it's not enough for an arrest. The cans were old, could have been there for months, and boot prints aren't conclusive, Nora frowned. So they just get away with it, for now. Yates's jaw tightened. Burke suggested I consider selling the creek parcel, said it might be the simplest way to end this feud. "Is that what you want to do?" Yates shook his head firmly. "No, that land was my father's legacy. He worked himself to the bone to secure those water rights legally. I won't hand them over to bullies and criminals." He sighed, sinking into a chair. "But I'm worried about putting you in danger." "If they're escalating to arson, I'm not afraid," Nora said, moving to stand beside him. "We'll face this together." He looked up at her, reaching for her hand. "I don't deserve you." "Nonsense." She squeezed his fingers. "Now I've been thinking. If the Harmons want that land so badly, there must be more to it than just water rights. Have you ever had it surveyed properly?" Yates blinked, considering. "Not beyond the basics needed for the deed. My father knew it had the creek, and that was enough for him." "Perhaps we should have a proper survey done. There might be something there that the Harmons know about that we don't." A slow smile spread across Yates's face. "Nora Blackburn, you're as smart as you are beautiful." He stood, pulling her into an embrace. "I'll ride into town tomorrow and see about hiring a surveyor." The next day, true to his word, Yates went to Scottsbluff to arrange for a survey of the disputed land. Nora stayed at the ranch, working on the accounts and preparing for the upcoming Thanksgiving celebration they had planned for the ranch hands and their families. She was in the kitchen, elbow deep in pie dough, when she heard horses approaching. Assuming it was Yates returning, she wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 riders were approaching the house, none of them Yates. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and hard-eyed. The one in front, a large man with a shock of red hair, she recognized from descriptions as Jeb Harmon, the eldest of Old Man Harmon's sons. Nora's first instinct was to bar the door, but she knew that would only delay the inevitable. Better to face them directly, to show no fear. She quickly checked that the small derringer Yates had given her was in her apron pocket, then stepped onto the porch as the men reined in their horses. "Mrs. Blackburn," Jeb Harmon called, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Sorry to disturb you. Is your husband at home?" "Mr. Blackburn is in town on business," Nora replied, keeping her voice steady. "I expect him back shortly with several of the hands." It was a bluff. Yates had taken only young Noah with him, and the rest of the men were far out on the range, but Harmon didn't need to know that. "That's a shame. We came to discuss a business proposition with him." Jeb dismounted, his brothers following suit. All three were armed, pistols visible at their hips. "I'd be happy to pass along a message," Nora said, not budging from her position on the porch. Jeb approached the steps, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It's a bit complicated for a message. Maybe we could wait inside for him to return." Nora lifted her chin. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Harmon. As I said, my husband will be back soon." "If you'd like to leave a note now, Mrs. Blackburn," Jeb interrupted, his tone hardening. "We've ridden a long way. Least you could do is offer us some hospitality. Isn't that the Christian thing to do?" The implicit threat was clear. Nora's hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the derringer. "Very well," she said after a moment. "You may wait on the porch. I'll bring you some coffee." Jeb's smile widened. "That's more like it." He turned to his brothers. "See, told you Blackburn's wife would be reasonable." Nora retreated into the house, her mind racing. She needed to stall until Yates returned, but she also needed to be prepared if the Harmons' intentions turned violent. In the kitchen, she put coffee on to boil, then quickly scribbled a note explaining the situation. If she could get to the barn, she might be able to send one of the dogs to the south pasture where some of the hands were working. A noise behind her made her whirl around. Jeb Harmon stood in the doorway, his brothers visible behind him in the parlor. "Thought you might need help with that coffee," he said, his smile gone. "But I see you're busy writing. Who's the note for Mrs. Blackburn?" Nora straightened, keeping the counter between them. "That's none of your concern." Jeb advanced into the kitchen, his brothers flanking him. The youngest barely more than a boy, though with the same hard eyes as his siblings, began opening drawers and cupboards. "Seems like a nice place Blackburn's got here," Jeb said, glancing around. "Shame if anything were to happen to it, like that fire last week. Terrible accident." "We both know that was no accident," Nora said, anger overcoming fear. Jeb's eyebrows rose. "Do we now got proof of that, do you?" "What do you want, Mr. Harmon?" "Same thing we've always wanted. That creek parcel. Your husband's been unreasonable about it. We thought maybe you could help him see sense." Nora's fingers tightened around the derringer in her pocket. "My husband makes his own decisions, and I support them fully. Even if those decisions put you in danger." Jeb leaned against the counter, too close for comfort. "Pretty lady like you shouldn't have to worry about fires and such. Might be safer all around if Blackburn just sold us that land." "Is that a threat?" Nora demanded. "Just stating facts, madam. Bad things happen out here on the frontier. Fires, cattle rustling, accidents." Jeb's gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Would be a shame if something happened to you because your husband was too stubborn to make a simple business deal." The sound of approaching horses saved Nora from having to respond. Jeb straightened, glancing toward the window. "Looks like your husband's back sooner than expected," he said. "This conversation isn't over, Mrs. Blackburn." Relief washed over Nora as the Harmons retreated, moving back through the house and onto the porch. She followed, keeping her distance, and saw Yates dismounting, his expression darkening as he recognized the visitors. "Harmon," he said, his voice cold. "What brings you to my property?" Jeb smiled thinly. "Just paying a social call, Blackburn, getting to know your lovely wife." "She's been most hospitable." Yates's eyes flicked to Nora, a silent question in them. She gave a small nod to indicate she was unharmed. "Well, you've paid your call," Yates said. "Now I suggest you leave. No need to be unfriendly." Jeb mounted his horse, his brothers doing the same. "We'll be seeing you again soon. Count on it." As they rode away, Yates hurried up the porch steps to Nora. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her hands were trembling now that the danger had passed. "They just wanted to intimidate us." Yates pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I shouldn't have left you alone. You couldn't have known they would come here." Nora leaned into his strength, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability now that the crisis was over. "Did you find a surveyor?" "Yes, he'll come out next week." Yates led her inside, checking each room as if to ensure the Harmons hadn't left anyone behind. "But after this, I'm not sure we should wait. I'm going to speak with Sheriff Burke again." That evening, after Yates had informed the ranch hands of the Harmons' visit and set a watch rotation for the night, they sat together by the fire, the events of the day casting a shadow over their usual peaceful routine. "I've been thinking," Yates said after a long silence. "Maybe we should leave for a while, visit my cousin in Colorado until this blows over." Nora looked up from her mending, surprised. "Leave the ranch, but you said you'd never give in to their intimidation." "That was before they threatened you." His expression was grim. "The ranch is just land and buildings, Nora. You're everything." The simple declaration made Nora's heart swell. She set aside her work and moved to sit beside him on the sofa, taking his hand in hers. "I won't run," she said firmly. "This is our home. If we leave now, they win." Yates studied her face. "You're sure? It could get worse before it gets better." "I'm sure." She squeezed his hand. "You said once that what matters out here is character, strength, and heart. Well, this is me showing all three." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Using my own words against me, if they fit," Nora replied, smiling back. Yates reached up to touch her cheek, his expression growing serious again. "I love you, Nora Blackburn, more than I thought possible when I sent that advertisement east." "And I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "My brave, stubborn cowboy." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally parted, breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Come to bed?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Nora nodded. Yes. That night their marriage was consummated at last, not out of duty or obligation but from love and desire. Yates was gentle, patient, his hands and lips worshipping every curve of Nora's body until she forgot to be self-conscious, forgot everything but the joy of being truly wanted, truly loved. Afterward, lying in his arms as their breathing slowed, Nora felt a profound sense of belonging. Whatever challenges they faced the Harmons, the harsh realities of ranch life, the judgments of others, they would face them together. The surveyor arrived the following week, a precise little man named Mr. Pritchard who spent 3 days meticulously examining the creek parcel. On the afternoon of the third day, he returned to the ranch house with Yates, both men looking excited. "Mrs. Blackburn," Mr. Pritchard said, doffing his hat as Nora greeted them on the porch. "Your husband tells me the survey was your idea, a most fortuitous suggestion, if I may say so." "What did you find?" Nora asked, looking between the two men. "Coal," Yates said simply. "A significant deposit, according to Mr. Pritchard." The surveyor nodded enthusiastically. "Indeed. The creek has exposed an outcropping that indicates a substantial seam running through the eastern portion of the parcel. With the railroad's expansion, such a resource could be quite valuable." Nora's eyes widened. "So that's why the Harmons want the land so badly." "It would appear so," Mr. Pritchard agreed. "Though whether they knew of the coal or merely suspected it, I cannot say." After the surveyor departed, promising to send a full written report, Yates and Nora discussed what this discovery meant for them. "We could sell the mining rights," Yates suggested. "Keep the land but allow a company to extract the coal. It would bring in steady income without affecting our water access." Nora considered this, "Or we could develop it ourselves, not immediately perhaps, but in time." Yates looked at her with admiration. "Always thinking ahead, that's why I need you." "What about the Harmons? Once they know we've discovered the coal, they'll be even more determined to get the land," Yates finished grimly. "But this changes things. Now we have something concrete to protect, and reason to believe they knew about the coal all along. Sheriff Burke will have to take our concerns more seriously." The discovery of coal on their land shifted the dynamics of their conflict with the Harmons. When Yates took the survey results to Sheriff Burke, the lawman agreed to increase patrols near the Blackburn Ranch and to speak directly with Old Man Harmon about his son's activities. The Harmons, however, were not so easily deterred. Small incidents began to plague the ranch: a fence cut here, a watering hole mudded there. Nothing catastrophic, but a constant reminder of the threat they posed. As November gave way to December, Nora threw herself into preparations for their first Christmas together. Despite the ongoing tension with the Harmons, she was determined to make the holiday special for Yates and for the ranch hands who would be far from their own families. Mrs. Jenkins helped her decorate the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and together they planned a feast that would feed 20 people on Christmas Day. Nora secretly worked on a gift for Yates: a new leather-bound ledger for the ranch accounts, embossed with his initials, ordered from a catalog and delivered discreetly by Mrs. Jenkins. 2 weeks before Christmas, Scottsbluff held its annual winter festival, a rare opportunity for the scattered ranching families to gather for socializing before the worst of winter's isolation set in. Nora was nervous about attending. It would be her first real introduction to the broader community, but Yates assured her she would be welcomed. Besides, he added as they dressed for the event, it's time everyone saw what a fine wife I've found. Nora smoothed down her best dress, a deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair. She had altered it herself, letting out seams where necessary to accommodate her figure. It wasn't the height of fashion, but it was neat and becoming. "Do I look presentable?" she asked, turning to Yates. He paused in the act of buttoning his vest, his eyes traveling over her with warmth. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Every man there will envy me." The festival was held in the town's newly built community hall, decorated festively with evergreen boughs and candles. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined the walls. As Yates and Nora entered, several people turned to look, conversations pausing momentarily before resuming with increased animation. "Everyone's staring," Nora murmured, her hand tightening on Yates's arm. "Of course they are," he replied. "You're the most beautiful woman in the room." Before Nora could respond to this gallant untruth, they were approached by a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples. "Blackburn," the man said, extending his hand. "Good to see you made it in, and this must be Mrs. Blackburn." "Sheriff Burke," Yates said, shaking the offered hand. "Yes, this is my wife, Nora Sheriff Thomas Burke." "A pleasure, madam," Burke said, tipping his hat to her. "I've heard good things about you from Mrs. Jenkins." Nora smiled, relaxing slightly at the friendly reception. "The pleasure is mine, Sheriff. I understand you've been helping with our situation." Burke's expression turned serious. "Doing what I can." "Just so you know, the Harmons are here tonight. Old man Harmon insisted they be allowed to attend, said barring them would be unjust without proof of wrongdoing. I've warned them to behave, but..." He shrugged eloquently. "We appreciate the warning," Yates said, his posture tensing slightly. As the sheriff moved away to greet other arrivals, Yates led Nora deeper into the hall, introducing her to neighbors and townspeople. Most were welcoming, if curious about the Boston bride their reclusive neighbor had acquired. A few of the women eyed Nora's figure with barely concealed disapproval, but she had expected as much and held her head high. "Mrs. Blackburn," a familiar voice said behind them. "How lovely to see you in a social setting." Nora turned to find Jeb Harmon standing there, flanked by his brothers. All three were dressed in their Sunday best, though the finery couldn't disguise the hardness in their eyes. "Mr. Harmon," she acknowledged coolly. Yates stepped slightly in front of her, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the Harmons. "Blackburn," Jeb said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Quite a charming wife you've found yourself. Must be a comfort during these cold winter nights." The innuendo was clear, and Nora felt Yates stiffen beside her. "I consider myself fortunate indeed," Yates replied, his voice level despite the anger Nora could sense beneath it. "I hear congratulations are in order," Jeb continued. "Something about a discovery on that creek parcel, coal, was it?" The directness of the question confirmed what they had suspected. The Harmons had known about the coal all along. "News travels fast," Yates said neutrally. "Small town," Jeb replied with a shrug. "No secrets here. We're still interested in that land, Blackburn, more so now, I expect." "Our offer stands," as does my answer. The land is not for sale. Jeb's smile faded. That's a shame. Would hate to see anything happen to your pretty wife because of your stubbornness. Yates took a step forward, but Nora placed a restraining hand on his arm. Mr. Harmon, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, threats don't become you, especially in a public setting. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were just about to dance. She turned, pulling Yates away before he could respond to Jeb's obvious provocation. The band had started a waltz, and several couples were already circling the floor. Dance with me, she said quietly to Yates. Show everyone that we're not intimidated. After a moment's hesitation, Yates nodded, leading her onto the dance floor. As they began to move with the music, Nora felt the tension gradually leave his body. You're handling this remarkably well, he murmured close to her ear. Years of Boston society prepared me for dealing with unpleasant people in social settings, she replied wryly. Though I admit the stakes are somewhat higher here. Yates's arm tightened around her waist. I won't let them hurt you. I know, she met his gaze steadily, and I won't let them drive us from our home. They danced in silence for a moment, the music weaving around them, creating a temporary bubble of peace. Have I told you today that I love you? Yates asked softly. Nora smiled. Not since breakfast. A grievous oversight. I love you, Nora Blackburn, more with each passing day. And I love you, she replied, her heart full despite the shadow of the Harmons' threat. Now and always. The rest of the evening passed without further incident from the Harmons, though Nora was aware of their watching eyes whenever she and Yates moved about the room. They left the festival earlier than they might have otherwise, both feeling the strain of maintaining a brave face. As they drove home through the clear, cold night, stars blazing overhead, Nora leaned against Yates's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. We can't live like this indefinitely, she said after a while, always looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next threat. Yates nodded, his jaw set. I know, I've been thinking, maybe it's time to take a more direct approach. What do you mean? I'm going to propose a partnership to Old Man Harmon, not for the land itself, but for the coal. They can have a share in the profits from mining it in exchange for ending this feud. Nora considered this. Do you think he'll agree? Hard to say. He's greedy enough that the prospect of guaranteed profits might appeal to him, and he's getting old, might be looking for a way to secure his legacy without further conflict. It's worth trying, Nora agreed. Better than waiting for them to escalate again. The next day, Yates rode to the Harmon ranch alone, despite Nora's protests. He returned at dusk, his expression thoughtful. Old Man Harmon listened, he reported as they sat down to dinner. Didn't give me an answer yet, said he needed to think it over. But he didn't outright refuse, which is something. What of his sons? Jeb was against it from the start. The younger two seemed more open to the idea. Yates reached for her hand across the table. It might work, Nora, it might actually work. For the next week, they waited anxiously for word from the Harmons. The ranch continued its daily routines, with extra vigilance from the hands who were now all aware of the situation. Nora threw herself into Christmas preparations, determined that the holiday would not be overshadowed by the conflict. On the morning of December 23rd, a rider approached the ranch, not one of the Harmons, but a hired hand from their ranch bearing a message. Old Man Harmon wanted to meet with Yates and Nora the following day at neutral ground, the Cattleman's Hotel in town, to discuss terms of a possible agreement. It's progress, Nora said cautiously as they watched the messenger ride away. It is, Yates agreed, but I'm not letting my guard down yet. Jeb Harmon won't give up easily, even if his father is inclined to make peace. They decided to accept the meeting, seeing it as their best chance to resolve the conflict before Christmas. The next morning, they set out for town early, wanting to arrive before the Harmons and assess the situation. The Cattleman's Hotel was quiet when they arrived, with only a few travelers in the lobby. Sheriff Burke was there as well, having been asked to attend as a neutral party. Harmon and his boys should be here within the hour, Burke told them. I've reserved the private dining room for the meeting. No weapons allowed inside. They settled in to wait, Nora trying to steady her nerves with a cup of tea. Yates paced the lobby, his restless energy betraying his own anxiety, When the Harmons finally arrived, it was with a surprising lack of fanfare. Old Man Harmon, a wizened figure with piercing eyes that belied his frail appearance, nodded curtly to Yates and Nora. His sons flanked him, Jeb's expression thunderous, the younger two merely watchful. Sheriff Burke led them all to the private dining room, where a large table had been set up with documents ready for signing if an agreement was reached. "Before we begin," Old Man Harmon said as they took their seats, "I want it understood that I'm here against my eldest son's advice. Jeb believes we should continue to press for outright ownership of the land." "And why aren't you following that advice?" Yates asked directly, the old man's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "Because I'm 83 years old, Blackburn. I don't have time for extended feuds anymore." "And your proposal?" He paused, glancing at the papers on the table. "It has merit, a steady income without the work of developing the mine ourselves. My younger sons see the sense in it." Jeb made a sound of disgust but remained silent at a sharp look from his father. For the next hour, they negotiated terms, percentages of profit, responsibilities for infrastructure, legal protections for both parties. Nora found herself drawing on her knowledge of the ranch's finances to suggest compromises that would benefit both sides. "Your wife has a good head for business," Old Man Harmon observed at one point, his eyes sharp on Nora's face. "One of her many qualities," Yates replied, his pride evident. Finally, a draft agreement was written up, with Sheriff Burke and the hotel manager as witnesses. As pens were passed around for signatures, Jeb Harmon abruptly stood. "This is a mistake," he declared. "We're letting them rob us of what should be ours." "Sit down, Jeb," his father ordered. "The decision is made." For a tense moment, it seemed Jeb might refuse. Then, with a muttered curse, he sank back into his chair, glaring at Yates with undisguised hatred. The signing proceeded without further interruption. When it was done, Old Man Harmon extended his hand to Yates. "To a profitable partnership," he said formally. Yates shook the offered hand. "And an end to hostilities." As they prepared to leave, Jeb brushed past Nora, whispering low enough that only she could hear, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." She maintained her composure until they were outside, then related Jeb's words to Yates and Sheriff Burke. "I'll keep an eye on him," Burke promised. "But with this agreement signed and his father and brothers on board, he'd be a fool to try anything overt. Jeb Harmon has never been accused of an excess of wisdom," Yates said grimly. "We'll stay vigilant." Despite the lingering concern about Jeb, the agreement with the Harmons lifted a tremendous weight from their shoulders. As they drove home, the landscape sparkling with fresh snow that had fallen during the meeting, there was a new lightness between them. "It feels like a Christmas miracle," Nora said, her breath clouding in the cold air. Yates smiled, squeezing her hand. "You're my miracle, Nora. Everything else is just good fortune." Christmas Day dawned clear and bright, the ranch house filled with the delicious smells of roasting turkey and baking pies. Nora had risen early to begin preparations for the feast, her heart full of joy despite her weariness. The past weeks had been a whirlwind from her arrival as a mail-order bride, uncertain of her reception, to becoming a true partner to Yates in every sense. She had faced mockery, threats, and danger, yet found strength she hadn't known she possessed. And through it all, she had found love deep, abiding love that saw beyond the surface to the person within. As she worked, Yates appeared in the kitchen doorway, a small package in his hands. "Merry Christmas, my love," he said, coming to kiss her soundly. "I know we said we'd exchange gifts later with everyone here, but I wanted to give you this one privately." Nora wiped her hands on her apron, accepting the carefully wrapped package. Inside was a small velvet box, and within that, a gold locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny daguerreotype of Yates on one side, the other side empty. "I thought," Yates said, suddenly shy, "that perhaps someday we might put a picture of our child there, if you want that too, I mean." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "Nothing would make me happier," she whispered, throwing her arms around him. He held her tightly, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of love. Later, as their home filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, The ranch hands and their families gathered around the long table for Christmas dinner. Nora looked around at the life she had found on the Nebraska prairie. It was not the future she had imagined for herself when she boarded that train in Boston, but it was infinitely richer, infinitely more precious. Beside her, Yates raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said, his eyes finding Nora's. "Those we're born to and those we choose." "To family," the gathering echoed, glasses clinking. As Nora sipped her wine, her free hand found Yates's under the table, their fingers intertwining. Whatever challenges the future held, whether from the Harmons, the harsh prairie winters, or the everyday struggles of ranch life, they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. And when, the following Christmas, they celebrated with their infant son cradled in Nora's arms, the locket around her neck now complete with his tiny portrait, the journey from mail-order bride to beloved wife and mother seemed like the most natural path in the world. For Nora had learned what Yates had known from the moment he saw her step off that train. That true beauty lies not in conforming to others' expectations, but in the courage to be exactly who you are, and in finding someone who sees that beauty without reservation. "I see nothing but beauty here," Yates had said on that first day. And every day since, he had shown her the truth of those words, helping her to see it too, the beauty in herself, in their love, and in the life they were building together on the wild Nebraska frontier.